Welcome back for the next segment of our interview on the Real News Network with Bob Rae, former Premier of Ontario, currently sitting MP for Toronto Centre and the foreign affairs critic of the Liberal Party. Thanks for joining us again.
Good to be with you.
So in the last segment of you said that we're in the game. The issue is to replace the Conservative Party, not to have splits in the Liberal Party and go in as a united force. But the question is, replace the Conservative Party with what? Now, for someone who's a Liberal Party partisan, replacing the Conservative Party is probably enough. Winning will be the objective. But if you're outside the Liberal Party and the issue is what's good for the country, and you think, I mean, I don't mind outing myself, I'm not a fan of the Conservative Party, if replacing the Conservative Party is what's good for the country, then replacing it with what? Just the Liberal Party winning ain't enough. It has to be a Liberal Party that's different than the Conservative Party. We're in a very unique moment in Canadian history where we have a sitting Prime Minister and a Prime Minister in waiting who both supported the Iraq War and an American President who opposed it. So the normal self-righteous Canadian positioning on these issues is a little skewed at the moment. In terms of Michael Ignatieff, if he is to become Prime Minister, what he believes in terms of foreign policy, is that really a change from Prime Minister Harper? And let me go back to and read you something that Michael Ignatieff wrote in 2003. And here for the audience, let me show you. I have this is the cover of the New York Times. Are we seeing it properly? Yes. This is Michael Ignatieff, front cover story in the New York Times. This is in January 2003. And this is just before the invasion of Iraq. And Michael Ignatieff writes this: America's empire is not like empires of times past, built on colonies, conquest, and the white man's burden. We are no longer in the era of the United Fruit Company, when American corporations needed the Marines to secure their investments overseas. The 21st century imperium is a new invention in the annals of political science, an empire light, a global hegemony whose grace notes are free markets, human rights, and democracy, enforced by the most awesome military power the world has ever known. This article was a fairly important piece of intellectual justification for the invasion of Iraq, which at the time, and Kofi Annan said later, was an illegal war. So what is your view of that war, the illegality of the war, and this whole philosophical notion of Michael Ignatieff of imperialism light? Because he doesn't end up that much, in my opinion, that far from what Stephen Harper thinks on these issues.
Well, first of all, I supported Mr. Chrétien's position and the position of my predecessor as the MP for Toronto Centre, who was our foreign minister at the time, Bill Graham, who stated very clearly that that for Canada to participate in an operation in Iraq, it would require the approval of the UN, the United Nations. And that approval wasn't forthcoming, and so we had no intention of participating in the invasion or in the operation. And I supported Mr. Chrétien's view at that time very strongly, and I also believed very strongly that there was not a legal justification for the war, and that the argument about the weapons of mass destruction and other arguments which were used, I felt were not based on the evidence that I had seen, and certainly not the evidence that was coming out of the people who were there to do the arms inspections, and who had a job to do, and who we felt were doing a good job, and who were saying we don't have that evidence. We were looking for it, but we can't find it. I also felt that the argument that Saddam Hussein is a bad guy and it's important to get rid of him is hard in terms of international politics, because there's a lot of bad guys out there, and a lot of bad governments, a lot of really bad governments. One could go down the list and say, here's a really bad one. Here's a bad leader, corrupt, has killed a lot of people, done a lot of bad things. What are we going to do? Get rid of him too? And where does the list stop?
And of course, on that list, you get rid of the ones you don't like, but you don't really mind the ones you...
And there was another argument that I felt very strongly that I think was very much part of the internal U.S. debate that was put forward in particular by the former head of the guy who advised the former government, the Clinton government, on national security issues. And that was the argument that this is a huge diversion from Afghanistan, which essentially I think is President Obama's view today, and which is why he's coming back to say, look, let's not forget the problem in Afghanistan with respect to Al-Qaeda, and that's the issue that we have to keep our eye on. And I think most people feel and recognize that having diverted their attention from Afghanistan, an awful lot was lost that didn't have to be lost, and we're now in a very difficult situation there. So for all those reasons, that's my position.
No, I understand, but isn't there a philosophical divide here? I mean, what do you think of the notion of imperialism light, that the history of the U.S. empire, he calls it an empire, Ignatieff, but it's this enlightened empire. And
I think, I mean, I don't know what Michael thinks now about that argument.
Because I've never heard him recant this piece. The most I've heard him say is that if I'd been privy to the information Chrétien had at the time, he said, I hope I would have come to the same conclusion. Yeah. But you had, I mean, he had information.
Well, we live in a world, first of all, we live in a world, Canada's position has always been, and in my opinion should always be, we're a country, we're a small country, we're 33 million people. We rely incredibly on international trade for our survival, so we need to have a multilateral trade position in order to do well, which is why I've had my issues with the focus on North American free trade as our salvation, because I don't think it is. Not because it's not better for us to be integrated into a North American economy, but because our way of dealing with American power as it relates to us is by having stronger international rules. We've also been consistently a country that, you know, we're strong pioneers for the Landmines Treaty, which the Americans have yet to sign. We're strong believers, we were key proponents of the International Criminal Court, which the Americans have yet to become part of. We've been present at the creation of the UN, like the U.S., at the UN Declaration of Human Rights. But there's a multilateral rule of law DNA that's part of Canadian foreign policy,
which in
part
2003,
of who we are.
Which in 2003, Ignatieff really broke with.
Well,
and I haven't heard him recant. So.
Well, you know, but again, I mean, I've said this to you before. I mean, those are discussions you can have with him. I'm not here to.
But you have to have those discussions with him.
No, we've had those discussions.
Can you set up the interview?
We've had those discussions. The direct issues that I've been talking to Michael about, you know, what should our position be on Sri Lanka? What should our position be on the UN? What should our positions be with respect to Afghanistan? What should our positions be with respect to Canada-US relations and Canada's overall perspective on international relations? There's no disagreement between us.
Well, on this, there's a critical.
There's no disagreement at all. I mean, again, you're fixating on what happened in Iraq in 2003.
I'm talking about the future.
Yes,
because all these issues right now, although Afghanistan's another topic which we're going to take up later, but you can, on the issues of Sri Lanka and other issues, you're not butting up head to head with the U.S. as happened on Iraq. And the question is, will Ignatieff stand up for international law in the face of a U.S. policy that might violate it?
Absolutely. I have no doubt about that whatsoever.
Why? Because he didn't.
Well, I mean, again, because of where he is and what he's doing, and the position that he now is undertaking as a leader of the Liberal Party, and that he aspires to as the Prime Minister of Canada. No Prime Minister of Canada, in my opinion, can ever move away from the rule of law as a critical component of Canadian foreign policy, and shouldn't move away from the position that this is what needs to be supported. You ask Mr. Harper now, I mean, he'll say, well, Iraq was Iraq, and he gave the famous speech that he gave that was the same speech that John Howard gave, not just the same kind of speech, but actually the same speech that John Howard gave, defending the former Australian Prime Minister, defending the war. It was all based on weapons of mass destruction, Saddam Hussein's a bad guy, blah, blah, blah. Well, those arguments were rejected in Canada at that time. Mr. Harper's not suggesting that we should send troops to Iraq. He's not suggesting that we should be moving away from the principles of international law.
Another
so,
example.
I mean, to me, I have no doubt whatsoever.
You just came back from the Middle East.
Yes.
And you said we should be pro-Israeli and pro-Arab.
Yes, have to be.
But Michael Ignatieff
approved the article, read the article, thought it was great, told me it's a terrific article, I'm proud of you, go ahead, put it out. It's the position of the Liberal Party of Canada.
At the time of the Israeli intervention into Lebanon,
yes,
where Human Rights Watch and the Red Cross said Israel was committing war crimes, and it was a disproportionate reaction to the kidnapping of a couple of soldiers, Michael Ignatieff defended Israel's position there, which again, according to most outside observers, was a violation of international law. But again, you get into this issue, will Ignatieff stand up on the question of U.S. policy?
I would argue with you. I mean, I don't, one can argue, for example, whether, I don't think that you could say that what Israel did was bad policy in terms of, did it make sense for them to do it in terms of Lebanon or in terms of Gaza. But in terms of the argument that these are breaches of international law, I think that's...
Well, Human Rights Watch and Red Cross called it war crimes.
They have lots of, there will be lots of opinions, but there's been no accusations with respect to war crimes or anything of that nature. There have been several comments that have been made, but
there are definite accusations over the recent incursion in Gaza and the use of phosphorus weapons.
And there's a prosperous, there's a process that can be brought to bear. But that's the difference between opinion, journalism, and law. I mean, if somebody says to me, well, there's a process by which there's going to be accusations brought and conclusions found, that's a different process from one in which people express a strong opinion saying, I object to this or I object to that. All I can tell you is that when I put forward the position that I put forward with respect to the Middle East, which again builds a lot on Canada's historic position, going back to our role at the foundation of the United Nations when UNSCOP was founded and when Judge Rand was made a member of the panel that decided on whether or not partition should take place in the old British Mandate of Palestine, and he argued that it should. And the logic of his position was, and the Canadian position at that time was, that that there were Jews, a substantial number of Jews, several 100,000 living in Palestine, who were living together as a community, and that it was reasonable for them to aspire to become a nation and a member of the United Nations, living side by side with another country, which was yet to be formed, because the Palestinians themselves rejected in toto the notion that Palestine should be partitioned. So the other half of the partition never has yet to happen. My argument was it's starting to happen now. It has since '93 in Oslo become a part and parcel of the national aspiration of the Palestinian people to say, yes, we will aspire to a state within a defined territory and boundary.
We just opened up a whole nother conversation. And we're not going to settle this in 21 seconds.
No.
So you're agreeing to come, we're going to do this in Washington in a couple of weeks.
Yes, I'm glad to come back.
And we'll take on Afghanistan.
Yes.
And we'll take on...
I want to talk about Sri Lanka, too. You forgot about that.
Unless you want to stay a few more minutes.
No, I can't. I've got.
Okay, so next time we're going to do Sri Lanka, we're going to do Afghanistan, we're going to do the Middle East.
Good.
Thanks very much for joining us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.
There are times when reality just asserts itself, in spite of the haze created by television news and entertainment. Sometimes crisis rips a tear in the fabric of myth and propaganda. Now a profound economic crisis has ripped asunder the American dream itself. Millions of people losing jobs and homes. They lack proper health care and any real sense of security. Since 2001, workers' wages have fallen or remained stagnant, even though worker productivity has risen almost 33%. By 2006, the top 1% of households were receiving 23% of all pre-tax income, more than double what it was in the 1970s. It's the greatest concentration of income since 1928. As unemployment rises, we need to know why this crisis is happening and what we can do to defend ourselves. Why are wages so low? Why is the society so laden with debt? Is it in ordinary Americans' interest to have a $1 trillion military budget to project power across the globe? Corporate television news won't ask these questions, let alone try to find answers. Only a truly independent news network can tackle these questions with courage and with ordinary people's interests in mind. We need a news network that's independent of corporations, governments, and political parties. We need the real news. But there won't be a real news network unless we raise substantial funds right away. The current financial crisis has hit our funding hard. Together, we do have the power to turn it around. There are already hundreds of thousands of people watching the Real News every month. If everyone pitches in, we can build an internet and cable television network that will change the face of media forever. You can organize house parties, talk to friends at school and at work, send email blasts and spread the word. Distribute this video to everyone you know. Pick up the phone and call a few friends and suggest they visit therealnews.com. Invest just 10 minutes a day to ask friends and colleagues to join the campaign to create a truly independent source of internet and television news. Together, we can build this network. Just 50,000 people at $10 a month gets us to our first level of sustainability. You can help us reach this goal, and when we do, we'll move to television in millions of homes across North America. Help us reach an audience in the millions. Please contribute generously. Spread the word. Let's make the Real News television network a reality.
Your tax-deductible donation makes it possible. Please contribute at therealnews.com.